What's up everyone, how's it going? This is Waj, and in this video I'm going to be doing a comparison and overview of the all-new MacBooks that were just announced very recently. So if you're interested in perhaps upgrading to one of these MacBooks in the future, thankfully you now have a good amount of selection to choose from. Specifically in this video, we'll be taking a look at the all-new MacBook versus the 2015 edition of the MacBook Pro and the 2015 version of the MacBook Air. So again, if you need more information on what the specific differences are between these three computers and perhaps you're upgrading to one of these in the near future, this is a perfect video for you. So let's get right into it. Now, the first thing that we're going to take a look at is actually the physical differences between these three MacBooks. Now, interestingly, the all-new MacBook is one of the thinnest computers that Apple has ever made. It's actually thinner than even the MacBook Air, which typically measures around 3 millimeters at its thinnest end and about 17 millimeters at its thickest point. Now, the new MacBook measures about 3.5 millimeters in terms of its thinnest point and about 13 millimeters at its thickest point, which probably makes it one of the thinnest computers and laptops you can get in the marketplace. Furthermore, the 2015 version of the MacBook Pro 13-inch edition measures about 18 millimeters across the entire profile of the computer. Now, in terms of weight, the 2015 version of the MacBook Air 13-inch edition measures about 2.96 pounds, versus the new MacBook is only about 2.03 pounds, almost a pound lighter than the Air, which is pretty darn incredible. And in terms of weight, the MacBook Pro measures around 3.48 pounds. Now, moving on, let's talk about the keyboards on all three of these computers. Now, the MacBook Pro and the MacBook Air are using the standard keyboards that you know and love from these computers. It's basically been carried on from the previous generation. So if you own a previous model, it's pretty much identical to that. Now, the all-new MacBook has something entirely different in terms of keyboard. Firstly, in terms of the size, you can see that they've pretty much maximized the entire real estate of the laptop itself, using every little tiny millimeter possible by filling that space with a keyboard, which is quite fantastic. And as a result of that, is that every keycap is about 17% larger. Now, furthermore, they've also reduced the overall profile of the keys themselves and the actuation mechanisms themselves. They've done this by replacing the traditional scissor mechanism actuation system with a butterfly mechanism actuation. So basically, you have a much thinner key profile with less travel space, which some people might find a downside because they want more of a raised keyboard that makes it easier to type on. It really depends on what you're used to and what you're comfortable with. Now, Apple does claim that there's a new butterfly mechanism system with the steel domes, which is going to be more effective and more accurate. But again, we're going to definitely have to test this out in real life and determine whether it's better than the previous generation keyboard. Now, in terms of trackpad, Apple has introduced a new trackpad called the Force Touch trackpad, and that's going to be available in the MacBook and in the MacBook Pro 13-inch edition. Now, some of the major changes on the trackpads includes the addition of 4 force sensors underneath the trackpads. Basically, these replace the traditional hinge system that you found in the upper portion of the traditional MacBook trackpads. And in addition to more touch sensors, basically you're going to have a more accurate trackpad that is going to give you the same sensation when you click physically down on it all across the area of the trackpad itself, versus previously you got that kind of a diving board effect where it would basically actuate in certain portions and it wouldn't be consistent across the entire surface of the trackpad. And you're going to have a more consistent experience in terms of that. Furthermore, they've introduced something called a force click function, which basically gives you a third click function. So traditionally you had a single tap, a double tap, and now if you press harder than normal, you're going to enable this third click function. And depending on what you're doing, so if you're web browsing, if you force click on a specific word, you get more information on that specific word via a Wikipedia link. Additionally, if you're on a mail app and you see an address or something like that, if you force click on that, you can bring up the maps functionality in OS X. The same thing goes for different contacts that have date and time where you can schedule that on your calendar. And if you're in the Finder, you can force click on a specific file to get a preview of it without actually having to open it. So pretty cool and interesting kind of functionality. We'll have to see how useful it is in real life. Now, moving right along, let's talk about the ports and connectivity options we have on all three of these computers. Now, the MacBook Pro hasn't really changed from the previous generation MacBook Pro, so that means you have MagSafe 2 for power connectivity, you have 2 Thunderbolt 2 connections, 2 USB 3.0 connections, a full HDMI port, a headphone jack, and a a full SD card slot. Now the new MacBook Air is pretty similar to last year's MacBook Air, with the exception that now we have Thunderbolt 2.0 connectivity, which is fantastic. Now interestingly, on the new MacBook, Apple has really drastically changed their philosophy for ports and connectivity. We basically have one USB-C connection, which is going to allow for charging, and if you buy certain adapters, you can get USB 3.0 functionality, you can get a DisplayPort video out, as well as VGA and HDMI, so if you want to hook it up to an external monitor or TV, you can do that with an adapter. And I'm sure as USB-C becomes more and more established in the industry, you're going to have more accessories and it's going to be more accepted for support. The cool thing about it is that it's very small, very compact, certainly going to be pretty durable than current generation USB connection. And as you may already know, it is a reversible cable, so you don't really need to orient the cable in any specific direction, which is quite great. On the other side, we do have a 3.5mm headphone jack as well as an audio out connection, so I'm glad that Apple at least kept that connection in. Furthermore, in terms of the front-facing FaceTime cameras, we basically have 720p resolution on both the Air and the Pro, but unfortunately the new MacBook only has 480p, which is certainly quite upsetting, especially if you do a lot of video conferencing on your MacBook. Now moving on, let's talk about the displays that comes in each of these computers. Basically, they're using very similar display technology, LED backlit with IPS technology, and they're all standard LCD panels. They do have a different overall resolution though. In terms of screen size, we're looking at a display size of 13.3 inch on both the Air and the Pro, and the MacBook is 12 inches. In terms of resolution, we have 1440 by 900 on the MacBook Air, and with a 13-inch screen size, it gives it a PPI count about 127 PPI. The MacBook has a Retina display of 2304 by 1440, and that has a PPI count of about 226, and the Retina version of the MacBook Pro has a 2560 by 1600, and that has a PPI count of 227. Now that essentially means that the MacBook Pro and the standard MacBook has pretty much the exact same pixel density, even though they're a little bit different in terms of screen size, but they're going to give you a very, very similar experience. And that's quite fantastic because the MacBook is certainly going to deliver that same level of quality that you experience from the Pro, but at a more compact size, which is definitely going to be interesting. But of course, the only way to really find out is when they're in front of our eyes. And once we have them physically, we can do a side-by-side comparison and see which display comes out to be the best. Now moving forward and talking about the internal specifications of these three computers, basically we're using Intel 5th generation CPUs on the MacBook Pro and the MacBook Air. The MacBook Air from a baseline perspective starts at 1.6 gigahertz and it turbos up to 2.7 gigahertz. It has 3 megabytes of level 3 cache. The base model of the MacBook Pro has a Intel Core i5 processor that is clocked about 2.7 gigahertz and it can turbo up to 3.1 gigahertz. Now the new MacBook has an entirely different platform. It's using Intel's Core M line of processors, which are certainly clocked a little bit lower, and they're much more efficient in terms of their power consumption. And more importantly, they've actually designed the logic board on the new MacBook to be fanless, and basically that means silent overall operation. That's really impressive. We're going to see what the performance impact is going to be with that kind of platform, but basically in terms of specs, it's 1.1 gigahertz and it can turbo up to 2.4 gigahertz and has 4 megabytes of level 3 cache. So it's going to be really interesting to see the difference between this platform and what you would find on a MacBook Pro and a MacBook Air. And certainly being quiet is going to be a huge plus side. Now you can upgrade the internal CPU to a slightly higher clock speed. And in terms of graphics, basically we're using Intel Iris 5300 graphics on the MacBook and a 6100 graphics on the MacBook Pro and 6000 series graphics on the MacBook Air. Now, in terms of RAM, we have 4 gigabytes of DDR3 on the Air. The baseline version of the MacBook actually comes with 8 gigabytes, which is definitely nice to see. Very similar specification to the Air. And on the MacBook Pro, we have 8 gigabytes of 1866 megahertz DDR3, which is certainly going to be ideal for any of you heavy-duty MacBook Pro users out there, and it's going to be faster than the other two models, certainly when it comes to multitasking capabilities. In terms of internal storage, All three of these have brand new internal PCIe based SSD storage. Now, in terms of the baseline configuration, both the Air and the Pro come with 128 gigabytes of storage versus the MacBook comes with 256, although you can upgrade all three of these computers to 512 gigabytes if you need more space. Now, moving forward, one of the last things that we're going to talk about is probably one of the most important aspects about any mobile computer, and that's battery life. Firstly, the MacBook Air is still the king of battery performance, getting over 12 hours of wireless web. It has a built-in 54 watt-hour lithium polymer battery. Now, the new MacBook is certainly not bad, 9 hours of wireless web time. It has a much smaller battery than the Air with a capacity of about 39.7 watt-hour battery. Now, the MacBook Pro is kind of in the middle between the Air and the standard MacBook at around 10 hours. They've upgraded the battery performance about an hour from last year's version of the MacBook Pro, which is definitely cool. So 10 hours of wireless web, and it has the bigger 74.9 watt-hour battery. Now, the very last thing that we're going to talk about is price point. Now, I typically don't like to talk about price because pricing always fluctuates depending upon where you are in the world and things like that. But in terms of US pricing, we're basically looking at $1,000 for the standard version of the 13-inch edition of the MacBook Air. And funny enough, in terms of the baseline configurations, both the MacBook Pro and the standard MacBook retail for pretty much the same amount, $1,300. So basically, if you're in the market for around $1,300 and you're swaying between the MacBook Pro and the standard MacBook, and perhaps you're even interested in the MacBook Air, I think you're definitely going to have to take a good look at what the advantages are between each computer. Certainly in terms of the Air, its battery life. When it comes to performance, the Pro still has it. And with this new edition of the MacBook, you're basically getting a little bit more RAM, 8 gigabytes instead of 4 compared to the Air. You're also getting a little bit more memory at 256 gigabytes. But keep in mind, I think what you're really paying for is that design. And certainly it is a really unique looking computer. It looks fantastic. I'm kind of drooling all over the place for it right now, and I'm really excited to see what it looks like in real life because with the different 3 color options, it's going to definitely give people some level of customization and a design that they haven't seen before in a premium grade laptop. So that's going to be really exciting to see, and I'm going to be curious to see which one people are going to go for. But other than that, guys, that's really it. Make sure to leave your comments down below on which computer best suits your needs, and we're going to have a full-on comparison of all these computers once we have them on hand, so that'll be really exciting. Make sure to subscribe to our channel, and if you liked the video, please make sure to give us a thumbs up, and thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you later. Take care.